take some time of silence. But I want to, as we move toward the matter of the morning, to remind us of Volf's encouraging exhortation that we may be bold to come and stand before God, each of us and also all of us, that there is a individual and a communal aspect to the power of Coram Dei, to stand before God. And so as we come from many places this morning already in a week that was no doubt chaotic for many of us, let's take a moment to just slow and center, and we'll again use the great app from the Contemplative Prayer Group. And so there'll be 3 rings in, 3 rings out of a Tibetan prayer bowl. But I also want to give you a prompt, because I kept thinking to myself as we looked last week at trying to make this important cerebral academic material make a migration from our head to our heart, that spiritual writers encourage us into this space, this intimate space of our heart where we can integrate all this for a fuller life so that we may love better. So this is Henry Nouwen, who many of you are very familiar with, but Nouwen encourages us this way. God is spirit and the source of all love. Our spiritual journey calls us to seek and find this living God of love in prayer, worship, spiritual reading, spiritual mentoring, compassionate service to the poor, and good friends. Let us claim the truth that we are loved and open our hearts to receive God's overflowing love poured out for us. And living fully each day, let us share that love in all our wonderful and difficult relationships, responsibilities, and passages. Let's take a few moments of quiet. Soren Kierkegaard is quoted as saying, "To be a saint is to will the one thing," which sounds so good, and immediately we're challenged with, what does that mean? Volf and Nouwen and so many great fellow travelers are trying to help us to again return to that place, to stand before God, and to be, as Kierkegaard wrote last week, merely human, just ourselves. What does it mean to become the person we're meant to be? Not somebody else, not some idol, not somebody else's measuring stick, but ourselves. All Saints always is the older I get, the more I become sentimental on All Saints. So if I might briefly, 2 stories about encountering this with people I've lost. I lost my dad when he was just 74, now almost 19 years ago. One of my greatest memories of him, for many reasons, is a walk we took from my previous parish just down the street to get coffee. And I had reached an age, I was 31, where I was beginning to be able to ask my dad good questions, finally. Questions that took life to get to. And I had known some of what my dad did. He had been an educational grant writer for public schools in Michigan. And I said, somewhat offhandedly, but somewhat like a young man fired into the world with passion, "Dad, did you keep track of your win-loss record as you would write grants and the response would come back?" And he looked over at me and he said, "Who loses?" And there it was, this seduction to be as great as my dad, or his own imaginings of himself. This idea of becoming something, this projection. As a person who has spent their life seeking a vocation in the priesthood, ministry, pastorate, the singular, most remarkable moment of ministry upended me early because I was 29 and we had 2 children at home, and I was writing my final project for my Master's of Divinity paper. And the project that I was writing on was theodicy, which is the seminary phrase for why do bad things happen to good people? What about all this evil in the world? Where does it come from? Forgive me, there's a lot of emotion in this. We were expecting our 3rd. It's been a long time, too. It's the amazing thing. We were 6 months in. And we learned only much later that our OBGYN was, in fact, a world-renowned expert on fetal demise. He traveled the world and explained to young OBGYNs what to look for. So we lost this baby. And the harsh reality is, at some point, you can't just deal with it simply. She had to deliver her. My wife had to deliver a child that we had hoped for, that we had named, ironically enough, Zoe. We had named her Zoe, which means life. And we were in a room waiting for the procedure to begin. There was a knock on the door, and our minister came in, Greg Meesemore. He was probably the last person I wanted to see right then. He had the least of any gifts or talents in my estimation to help me in that moment with the pile on my soul. And I literally braced myself for what is this idiot going to say to me? And my bride, Janine. And he came to the bedside and he just began to weep. unashamedly. He had nothing to say and he knew it, and he moved into a moment with us. What is ministry if not moving into moments with one another, honestly, and without some yardstick measure of what it's supposed to be? I think the brilliance of this book is it moves us beyond the artifice. So much artifice of life, so much vanity, and it leads us into a place before God where we might truly recognize what love is, how we are loved, and we may soak it up like a sponge so that we may love others better. Our leader this morning is John Milton. This is him in the center from his Christ College portrait that hangs at Cambridge. It's painted by either, and this is curious to me, they're not sure. It's either Peter Lely or Mary Beale. So one of those two is credited that. The two outside are Gustave Doré prints that many of you may have seen and know well, that have been frequently used with the works of Milton. The idea, the fall of Satan and the temptation of Eve. I want to continue and try to bracket off a couple of pieces. Again, these prefaces I always find myself offering. The first is not a bracketing off, but the first is to say, again, raise your hand if you're reading the book. I don't want to lean too much on the book. But for those reading the book, and those that are not, this book becomes a bit of a challenge for us in a good way, but there is an enormous amount of synthesis that's going on inside Miroslav Volf that produces each sentence. What he understands and can put into conversation with another thing, another domain, another sphere, is spellbinding. And it's almost fun for me at times to take any given sentence and just like, okay, he's riffing on 7 different streams of thought, 3 theories of major authors. All this stuff is synthesized. So it's complicated because he engages many different domains, and it's important for us to understand that and give ourselves patience as we try to wrestle through it all. Now, here's the bracketing off part. My bracketing off part would be to say, if you've read the book, or even as we proceed, I would love to bracket off, that is to say, I don't want to make it off limits, but I would like it not to distract us too much. That there are 2 or 3 complications in this chapter that may lead us into more complicated conversations than we necessarily want to work on with the principal work he's after, the project of allowing us to come to drop our ambitions for superiority and to simply be before God. The first is Satan. The first is how Volf is working with Satan, because most of you have heard in your life and education, the concept of Satan is at very best very complicated through the development of Hebrew scriptures and the New Testament. The character, as John Milton develops him as a literary character, may or may not have any resemblance to the scriptural character. And that's not unimportant, but it will also take us down a road that may not be as fruitful today for us as allowing Volf to use this literary character in Milton's work. The second, and again, maybe this doesn't trip anyone else up, but it was funny because, again, aside, I hope you spend more time listening to Patrick's sermon more intently today than you might. Again, today's sermon, I couldn't have asked him to do more things than he does in the sermon that lines up with so much of what we're trying to wrestle with today. One of the things he alludes to and is working within creeds, and here's where we start to get kind of into the weeds a bit. There are some complicated cross-traffic theologically about the Trinity in his chapter. And he recognizes that, and he deals with it in his way, which is very, again, so synthetic and so understanding of so many streams. But it can become complicated, and it can become something that we want to argue about. I don't necessarily want to argue about it. What I'd like to do is just let Volf speak and try to allow what he does to teach us as much as he can without, tripping us up. Briefly, Orthodox Christianity has held Creator, Redeemer, and Sustainer exist in a relationship that can become argued about. The complicated piece is God in charge? Is God superior, to use Volf's language, such that the Father tells the Son what to do? Which again, from many of us in this room understand relationally from our households, that's what goes on. The Father is over the Son. That can become complicated, though, and it's technically labeled a heresy in the Roman Catholic Church. But for our purposes, I want us to allow Volf's work in his complicated project around Satan's fall to stand on its own. I want to dig into the chapter for longer this week, but I also want us to, again, constantly be driving, which I believe Volf would want for us, from his work to the ground, to our feet, where we stand. So, as I have become being intentionally acculturated within the Episcopal Church and more broadly the Anglican World Communion, there's a lot of stuff that is complicated in our communion. Father Dean spoke 2 weeks ago about the deeply complicated reality that the GAFCON, which stands for the Global Anglican Fellowship Conference, which sees itself as a big part of the southern cone of our planet, but also sees itself as the truer Anglican Church than the worldwide Anglican community, has threatened to break off and technically even sent a letter saying we're breaking off. If this comes to fruition, it will be a horrific blow to the body of Christ, as all schisms are. But closer to home, I've been trying to pay attention to our newish presiding bishop who's just begun. Both he and Bishop Julia were enthroned just last year, so they're both settling into complicated tenures. Sean Rowe, who is the youngest ever presiding bishop of the Episcopal Church, was speaking in Atlanta in September. And again, I'm reading all these things far and upfield. But I'll just read this from the Episcopal Diocese of Atlanta. It's published on October 3rd, but describes events from middle or late September. Presiding Bishop Sean W. Rowe and over 200 clergy from the Diocese of Georgia and the Diocese of Atlanta gathered at a Rock Eagle 4-H Center in Eatonton from September 22nd to the 24th with the goal to be effective witnesses in the footsteps of St. Matthew and Anna Ellison Butler Alexandra, the patron saint of the Diocese of Georgia and the only black deaconess in the history of the Episcopal Church, which is complicated. We dug into this a few weeks ago at St. Paul's in Linfield, and we don't think she's the only one, but she was the first one. Rose said this: we have a particular way of being, a particular way of seeing the world. And it's much more compelling than the gospel of dominion or domination that is out there as the prevalent Christian narrative. Now we're getting into this book. Now we're talking about who are we as a body? Who are we together? What are we doing with our assets and resources? How are we teaching our children? Amid Christian nationalism and a distrust of institutions, the Episcopal Church may be one of the last institutions staking its privilege and bearing witness to Christ as the only reality, Rowe said. But witnessing boldly, he warned, requires going beyond virtue signaling and may mean losing social status. Episcopalians need, quote, to collectively mobilize and take all this privilege that we've garnered up to this point, that we're the church of the presidents and the Supreme Court and most senators, and all this stuff that we talk about all the time when we're nostalgic. This is capital. It's going to have to be spent. I wonder if we'll have the National Cathedral. I wonder if we're going to be any of that anymore. That's all on the line now as we enter into this particular period of history. So again, friends, as we Episcopalians, as we Christians consider the moment, and we recognize that we have, as a body, been rather elite and in control, on top of things, how do we give it away? Help others up. Consider what it means to spend social capital. So I want us to dive into this chapter. And again, it's long. It's over 40 pages. And it's a tremendous dive into a literary analysis of John Milton's Paradise Lost and Paradise Regained. There are so many things to talk about, but I want to try to provoke you with a few questions, then I want to let you all go where you are inspired to go. But one of the curious pieces that Volf talks about, and it's a piece of literary history that many of you may be familiar with, is that Milton took a lot of flack for the way in which he wrote the literary character of Satan in Paradise Lost and Paradise Regained. Forgive me, I started on medicine about a year ago, and the doctor said, you're going to probably have some dry mouth. And of course, the follow-up, do you have any dry mouth? No dry mouth, except when I need it most when I'm speaking or preaching. So it's the worst when it's somehow triggered with my nervous system, so I get anxious and nervous, I get dry mouth.
That's okay, we're a family, Joel.
Exactly, there we go, so lay it right out there. Milton's character of Satan is clearly malevolent. And Milton, an Orthodox Christian, wants us to understand that Milton understands that Satan engaged a rebellion against God, an ambition towards superiority, which is both intellectually ridiculous as a created being of the only creator, and also horrible relationally, that he tries to usurp the one who generously gave him everything he has. But the criticisms are reasonable if you were able to read some of Milton's passages, or you may recall reading it at some point in your education, that Satan comes across as a pretty slick fellow, pretty put together, and charismatic, and remarkable, which shouldn't be lost on us also. I think both Milton and Volf are picking up on the fact that we can say a certain kind of ambition is bad because it's ugly, but there's more to it than that. Ambition for superiority may come in a very pretty package that may in fact be even more cruel to us. So I got myself thinking about, as I was reading along this chapter, Milton was accused of having sympathy for the devil, which of course made me think of the song Sympathy for the Devil, which led me down the road to listen to Sympathy for the Devil from a number of different eras, and then covers. And you may or may not know that Motorhead has a magnificent cover of Sympathy for the Devil, although Creedence Clearwater Revival's version isn't necessarily my thing, but some of you who are more Horns people may like it a lot. The reality is we have this sense of that wickedness, avarice, cravenness may in fact be very attractive at times. It may be in fact what it lures us right in. So I want to invite you to think for yourself, as you understand or have read, do you find yourself sympathetic for these characters, for Satan for Eve. I meant to say this in the brackets. Volf does something that's a little complicated, trying to bracket this again, but he sort of says, Milton is really great, except he's wrong. But I'm going to let that stand. We're going to go back to here. So he essentially says Milton and everybody living in Milton's time thought that the natural order, even natural law, was that God's in charge, God is over men, men are over women. He sort of says, well, we're going to say that's wrong, we're going to keep moving. So his piece is that part of what is so horrific is that Eve is upending Milton's understanding of the natural order. And you can't do that. You're not supposed to do that. It's against the rules. So perhaps you feel akin to Eve. Or maybe even you find yourself akin to Milton, who's wrestling with these characters and trying to appropriate them into the right categories, right and wrong, empathic or not. Where do you find yourself sympathizing? Can you find yourself in this story as we seek again to find our place standing before God as mere humans? Does that provoke anyone? Please, Bruce.
Well, the first thing that comes to my mind is, one, thank you for making rock and roll footnotes to this. But the passage that comes to my mind is from Ephesians, where Paul starts this whole passage with, be submissive one to another out of reverence for Christ.
Yeah.
And then he gives this list of how to be submissive.
Yeah.
But it starts with, be submissive one to another.
Exactly.
Within the body. And then, of course, I'm thinking of Rublev's famous Trinity icon where the three figures
Yes.
are submissive to one another. They're genuflecting to each other, the Father to the Son to the Father to the Spirit. And that model of mutual submission is something completely unknown to our society.
Yes.
We don't know what that means. It's totally opaque to us.
Especially with power, with those who gain the greatest power. Because again, you're talking about the Trinity. You're talking about three persons of the most powerful entity. But one of my children asked me at one point, sometime in the last couple of years, I think it was probably related to the Epstein crisis, Dad, has anybody really powerful and wealthy gone to jail in the United States? And I submit to you, it's a pretty short list, if you can find any. The reality is we somehow permit the worst of humanity. We lift that up and we give it grace as opposed to a mutuality.
Well, another thing, sorry, I don't want to do more than my share of talking here, but one other thing that struck me was, why would we be tempted to something that was ugly? So if the devil were just this ugly thing with horns and a tail and a pitchfork, that's completely unbelievable. We're only attracted to things that are beautiful.
Yes.
Things that we find compelling or interesting or, yeah. So it makes perfect sense that the devil would be someone brilliant and enticing. Successful, powerful.
Innovative, all these, right?
Yeah.
Exactly. Yes. If
Creative.
you all couldn't hear Bruce, I want to repeat that there is this curious piece in it, and it comes into our story here and how Milton is treating Satan, is that why would we be enticed to ugly? We're enticed by beautiful, sexy, attractive, successful. And that's the trick, is that so often it's that very thing that draws us forth that may in fact be causing our own falls. Sorry, I wanted to give you a chance. You may be protesting.
I'm just going to be the devil's advocate.
Yes, we need that. We need a Satan.
First of all, I don't think things are so black and white. And a perfect example is somebody like my husband, who ran a successful company, was really a wonderful employer, and provided jobs for probably 200 families. So just to say success is bad and
I want to confess then that I feel like I'm failing us again because I somehow have conveyed, which is not what Volf's saying, nor am I trying to convey what he's saying, that ambition is a bad idea. Nor even becoming a better person is a bad idea, nor a better person yourself. All those are actually laudatory. And I think that Volf makes that point clear, and I'm trying to make the point clear. We cross a line, though, when we engage in dehumanizing behavior, or we demean, even if this only goes on in our heart or head, other human beings, and we begin to think of ourselves as better, or others as lesser. It's this piece about superiority. Again, we always catch flack in this country when somebody says, America's great, but other countries are good too. All of a sudden people are yelping about, wait, you're being unpatriotic. No, the person said, America is great, but other people are great too. It's this piece where if the only way America can be great is if everyone else sucks, then we have a problem. We've turned, we are no longer engaging in seeing the world the way God sees the world, where every child is a beloved child of God. So it's that piece. And Claire, I appreciate you saying, no, it's because there's nothing wrong. When I was in my senior year of college, there were two very wealthy men in my town who were very public, and everybody knew how powerful they were, and they were remarkable people. They were remarkable people, both billionaires. And one man did whatever he wanted, very publicly. We had a Burger King on Main Street, and he didn't like it, so he bought it and raised it, just raised it. The other guy took huge amounts of power and plowed it into education. You see what I'm saying? It's this idea about hubris and considering the other and what one does with it once one develops all this capital. As Sean Rowe is saying, we've got all this capital. What do we do with it now? Who else? Where's that taking you? Please.
So one, I think you asked, who do we identify with?
Yes.
I certainly identify with John Milton.
Yes.
Because I think one of the things that Miroslav is pointing to is our being wired for story.
Yeah.
And the fact that John Milton takes a character who appears repeatedly in the Bible, yeah, and in some cases, like Job, with quite a bit of personality,
yeah,
but in many other cases not, yeah, and weaves together a story about this character. And I think it tells us a lot about ourselves and also a lot about God. So you don't have to accept the hierarchy of 17th century England to receive great wisdom through Milton.
Yes.
I talked with Miroslav at some length while he was writing this book about the whole question of American exceptionalism. And I believe there is great value in American exceptionalism, and that it doesn't have to veer into what we often see as American exceptionalism expressed in a superiority over other countries. It's okay to be different, it seems to me, as long as we rejoice in the differences without the pride that often comes out of that. And so the comparative character of the ambition that he is lamenting is the nub of it, as you say, and that's something that Satan, I believe, understands wholeheartedly. And one example of that is the idea that humans can, in some sense, become superior, or at least equal, to God.
Yes.
And that's right on the right-hand part of the slide. So recognizing that yearning for superiority over others, an ambition to create hierarchy, and in Satan's case, false hierarchy, I think is something that we need to understand about ourselves, riven as we are.
That's all your points are great, Bill. If you couldn't hear them, I'm assuming you can hear them, but so several pieces in there, but the important reality that American exceptionalism may not necessarily be weaponized for this superiority, which Volf is encouraging us to reject. That American exceptionalism may in fact provoke us as a nation, as human beings, to something quite good and noble, which I think is true, and I think Volf is definitely making the point. And I want,
for the record, I'm not sure that he then or now accepts my point, but at least I made it.
sorry, we're really agreeing that Volf was generous with Bill and at least acknowledges him as an engaging interlocutor. But this other piece I think is really true, that, and again, you need to take time with this because you're reading old poetry, but Volf lifts a huge amount of the poems and allows us to read these arguments that Satan constructs, which are really crafty and thoughtful, and they make sense. And this is where it gets tricky, right? It makes sense somehow to blow boats up in the ocean because that makes us safe somehow, right? It makes sense. Now again, trying to make this maybe too easy of an argument, but sometimes that which makes sense isn't good or right. And I want to extend this into this idea that one of the things that Milton builds into the Paradise Lost, but that Volf is also commenting on, is that essentially Satan begins his engagement by lying and shifting or constructing a false narrative, which he, I think, may believe, but even more nefariously may not believe, but may believe makes sense enough to allow him to get what he wants, which is to usurp God. And so again, hopefully some of this allows you to step into spaces for you and your engagement with the world where these are the routine temptations of our regular lives, our regular work, the places where we live. Sorry, Janice, you had your hand.
Oh, I guess I identify with Eve
Louder, please. Sorry.
you were talking about, ugly power of a horned and tailed being.
Right.
I was thinking about how during the Me Too movement, Weinstein, and like my work environment, and just how power is sexy.
Yeah.
And there's an early picture of Bezos when he was driving a Honda, early days.
Yeah.
I wouldn't swipe left or right on his picture at that point.
Right.
He's not really cute.
Right.
Fast forward.
Right.
He's
still not cute.
has he gotten cuter because of his money?
Yeah.
And he does, his biceps are a little bigger. But is it because is he now more attractive because of his power?
Right.
And I feel that in the workplace
Yes.
where if I switch Bezos to be the janitor
Right.
and the janitor to be Mr. Amazon,
Yeah.
okay, now who's cuter or
Right.
who's got more power? But anyway, so just when you're saying that about how the devil doesn't have to be very cute
Yeah.
to lead me astray, usurp my
Yeah. Thank you.
God.
Yes. Sorry, Denise.
I haven't read the book, but sort of what I'm hearing and putting together is like a creature can be beautiful and manipulative. Like we can pursue goodness, we can pursue to do our best, we can pursue so many things, but is the twist manipulativeness. I'm gonna trick people into doing what I want them to do so that I have more power. That's just my question. Like, right, there is someone beautiful and a paragon of goodness, and there are ways in which you see that, but can they also very quickly, because of the power that is afforded to them in society, turn that into manipulation of other people? And I do think you're demeaning and diminishing other people's importance as equal to yours. It's the egalitarian thing. That's what I'm hearing.
Yes. Yes. Is it Milton's main point or Volf's? No. But they would say that is what's going on. They would say that we, utilizing, because I think in the previous chapter he uses both the word paragon and the word model, or a better word than I'm losing right now, for who Jesus Christ is in our lives.
Yeah.
This is the model. This is what we are to emulate. But that Satan, in Satan's great phrase of self-construction or self-creation, creates this narrative which is surprisingly beautiful, attractive, charismatic. And this is the challenge of what Milton is skating on this razor's edge, saying it's attractive, but it's horrifying. It's great for all the wrong reasons. And that then can sway us. That idea can sway us. That aesthetic can sway us. But I think Bruce's point earlier too is that it doesn't have to be. We can get lost. I think Volf and Milton are making the point too. We can get lost in what it is that's absent within us that we're trying to compensate for. And this is both Milton clearly as the creator, and then Volf as the thoughtful observer and engager, are recognizing this and examining this complicated psychological profile of Satan, this character, this literary character. And what drove him, again, having been, they write that he was created first, that he was the most magnificent, and yet he finds absence. He discovers this hole in his heart that he desires to fill. And I think that idea is very true in each of our lives, all of our lives. Yeah, Jeff, please.
I've got to run, but just to speak briefly on kind of the macro side of things, I'm so grateful that we're doing this work, because I think the question of power and how we navigate power is one of the, if not the only, central questions. And I think it puts us in an interesting relationship to God, who gives us this power of being image bearers and being co-creators. And then we're in relationship to Jesus, who I think the way Jesus relates to power in the Gospels, to me, that's the most interesting thing about Jesus, and the thing that we can learn the most about. And I think we need to constantly, as a faith community, be thinking about, our temptation as Americans, as Christians, as people who've had hegemony, like hetero-white men, about are we embracing or choosing power over, or are we using power for or having power with? And what does Jesus teach us about power? I think we could spend our lives like wrestling with that, and I think we'll have a full and meaningful engagement with Christ. And it really pushes me kind of that to Henry Nouwen, like talking about the Eucharist. I know I'm talking, but in that book, The Life of the Beloved, saying the power that God invested in Christ, right? Is that Christ was taken, he was blessed, just like we did in the Eucharist. He was broken, just like we did in the Eucharist. Was given, just like in the Eucharist.
Well, I'll pick up and also say that Jeff has provoked me over the years in great ways with some of his thinking, and there are other people thinking this way, but the idea of thinking theologically about disability. What does it mean to be the image bearer if in fact you can't contribute in the same way you can't contribute in the same way as somebody else? You're not going to go to Harvard. You're not maybe ever going to speak. In my parish previously, we had a family that had 2 children that were globally disabled. We're not exactly sure why. Science doesn't yet know exactly why. At a set of weeks into their lives, their brains sabotaged themselves, and they became sort of stuck in something like 3-month-old life. Pre-verbal, maybe ability to see, maybe not, but their whole lives, and they're now, one is 28, one's 30, they live completely dependent on others for safety, for being able to attend to what arises in their lives and bodies. That other people have to realize they've got a fever. They can't say I'm hot, I'm uncomfortable. The challenge is, and in the world we're living in, there are places, many countries on the planet that are considering in this utilitarian analysis of what's the value of a human being if they're not a human being, if they're not full and contributing. Meritocracy at its very worst, most nightmarish. So Jeff has written quite a bit on this, and it's really, his writing is always good and thoughtful. This idea of the imago Dei is not an imprint of greatness. It's an imprint of godness, that we are beloved. Again, back to Nouwen. For those who don't know, I'm a huge Nouwen fan. Nouwen spent his whole life telling people how beloved they were, because Nouwen couldn't feel beloved. That was his hole. And the reality is we all have these holes, and we struggle with just feeling beloved. There was somebody else. Meg, please.
I haven't read the book.
You're not reading the book.
I'm not reading the book. I read the conclusions of the 24.
Oh, good.
thing. But I'll see if I can articulate this. It's coming back to Satan and Jesus and his offering Jesus, like, be the ruler of the whole world and
Yes.
worship
Yes.
him. And Jesus turns him down, and it's like, this isn't going to end well for you, Jesus. And then we get right to the end of Jesus' life, and here he has been the Son of God, teaching us how to be, how to follow him, do what he does in order to truly succeed in God's eyes. And it's not success, it's to be the best you can be. But anyway, so he gets all the way to the Last Supper, and then what does he do as the king? He washes his disciples' feet. And then the next day he's in front of Pilate, who says, are you the king of the Jews? And he says, well, I am the king, but not of this world. And I interpret that as not in the worldly sense that you mean. I'm not here making decrees and telling everyone what to do and building big McDonald's and ballrooms.
Yes.
And
Right. Right.
so, and, you know, and he even goes to the point of giving up his whole life.
Yes.
Then, of course, he has the last laugh on Satan because
Right.
he rises from the dead.
Right.
But it's just this thing that our whole sense, if he had come and said, I'm going to be your king, we would project it on him. Oh, you're going to be up there on the
Right.
throne, and you're going to tell us all what to do. We'll be your subjects, and you'll have decrees. And what I feel is some of the churches now want Jesus on that throne, making decrees, and the Bible are the decrees. You can't be gay, and you can't be this, and you can't, you know, and you have to sign on the dotted line to be a Christian nationalist or something. And I'm thinking, no, we can't make Jesus that king. I mean, his kingship was not the worldly kingship that we think of. Does that make sense?
It makes great sense. It's a great point, and I'm conscious of time too, but in successive chapters, Alan will lead us into going to spend some time on the Christ hymn from Philippians, which is really essential. This idea of what God's MO is, which is emptying oneself and taking the form of a slave. And it's exactly this. C.S. Lewis isn't always great in my estimation, but sometimes C.S. Lewis is remarkable. And particularly when we can have it now dramatically portrayed in a movie or a film or on television. It's this idea of at the end when the altar is broken and Aslan shows up and they're like, wait a second, you're defying the rules and the rules are supposed to say this. And he says, no, there's a deeper magic. It's a really great theological way of understanding. There's a deeper magic than all of our clinging to power and all of our, again, as you thoughtfully said, we want the king for us. We want the king that's going to take care of us, make sure our retirement package is going well, that our neighborhood stays, whatever, rules and law and order, all this dog whistles. It's horrific. I want to bring us to a close by a spiritual exercise, and I want to use Volf to do this. And so, to get there, I want to say, I was mindful this morning in the 8 o'clock Eucharist. And again, maybe you all don't pay as much of attention to some of the things that Patrick does because it's what Patrick does or Dean does. But there's this remarkable sentence in the Eucharistic prayer, which is this. And although we are unworthy through our manifold sins to offer unto thee any sacrifice, yet we beseech thee to accept this our bounden duty and service, not weighing our merits, but pardoning our offenses. This idea of what is God's economy? What is it? How does God value us? And Volf has this great concept that I'd love, again, I'm going to give you about a minute to just quietly center yourselves. We'll conclude with the Lord's Prayer together. But I want you to think about one of the phrases that Satan uses in Milton's Paradise Lost is that I feel undelighted. Here I am in Eden, in this perfect place, and I am undelighted. How is that possible, really, you ask yourself? I want to invite you to consider, how are you feeling undelighted in such a way that you might be drawn toward a delight which takes you in a bad direction? It's that, what is that itch that bugs you, that you want to overcome? So a few moments, quiet, consider yourself aright, close your eyes, leave them open. In a moment I'll gather us back and we'll close together. Thank you, friends. As our Savior has taught us, we boldly now say together, Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses,